When you spoke about the real estate, the housing crash, Ning, back home, whenever I talk to real estate developers, there's a certain delusion that land prices can never go down. I've heard this time and time again. I've heard this from everybody for a long, long time now. How did it happen in China? So maybe people back home can learn.
I think it's a matter of narrative. I work a lot with Bob Shiller, so I think I'm unavoidably influenced by him. I think in the first decade of this century, it's probably the normal marketization of real estate because after all, people don't have a property to own before 2000s in general. And then I think after 2008, after the 4 trillion stimulus packages, I think the housing prices went up so much that people were just convinced that this is the best way to make my money. And then I think after 2015, 2016, in order to alleviate the fall down from the stock market crash, I think there's another big wave of the push. So in China, this is why I wrote my book, Guaranteed a Bubble. I think the government has a lot to do to support or to push up or shore up the housing prices, which is solidify people's expectation about housing prices will never come down or land prices will never come down.
Can you elaborate? What does the government have to do?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is, in general, people believe that the central government really cares about the GDP growth. And back in the past decade, from 2009 through 2020, real estate investment is the best way to boost the short-term economic growth. So I think whenever there is a slowdown in the economy, coming down from the central government down to the local government, they all want to sell more houses, build more houses. So that's going to push up the economic growth. At the same time, which I think will be a more complex issue in India, is land sales have become the biggest contribution to fiscal revenues to many local governments in China. So, of course, local governments have the incentive of pushing up the housing prices eventually in order to sell more lands at higher prices. So those two forces work together to ensure people really believe there's no way the government is willing to let down the housing prices. And I think that a guarantee from the government is reinforcing people's already strong expectation, as you described in India, about housing prices will never fall. Of course, that's the purpose of my book. Once it starts turning, it turns very badly.
Yeah, whenever everybody believes the same thing.
Exactly.
I mean, I also say there are plenty of other places that had housing bubbles and busts recently with different economic systems. So it's a pretty broad-based phenomenon. And I think actually the commonality is in those places in Europe and the US and in Japan and elsewhere is because so many people have the majority, if not the vast majority of their wealth in housing, there is a very reasonable motivation for governments to not want housing prices to go down. I mean, maybe you don't want it to go up a lot, but you certainly don't want it to go down because, you're screwing over a lot of your constituents. And so the problem is, as you said, if everyone believes it's not going to go down, that creates incentive to borrow more to go up. Right. Because your downside risk is capped, so you're going to borrow more to make it go up. And that's where it gets challenging. But I mean, there is a reason for this.
Do you have property taxes, like high property taxes?
That's one thing I've been advising a lot in China. We do have in 2 cities, but to a far less extent than what we normally have in other parts of the world.
I think that's the only way to keep it in check.
I agree.
I feel like even in India, we have really low property taxes. We have a lot of the shadow economy, the money which is not paying tax sitting in real estate. And maybe a good way to bring that back into the formal ecosystem is having higher property tax.
Yes, and as a California resident, we have the delightful situation of a headline property tax that is normal, but then most people don't pay it because the value of your house does not adjust with the market, which it creates.
Some of my colleagues from UC used to have a research about showing and comparing the different states in terms of their property tax and the amount of appreciation in their housing prices. There's a clear negative correlation between the level of property taxes and the speed by which your housing prices appreciate.
I'll say another thing that as a policy reminded of U.S. cross-state differences, the extent to which lenders have less protection if they're lending against real estate, that will also be a useful corrective because the more secure they are or the more secure they think they are. Whereas I remember looking at reading research on this in the U.S., the housing debt. So Texas, some legacy of the I think the Mexican Constitution or something was inherited. That you essentially, if you did a home equity loan on a house in Texas, more or less, you had no collateral. If there was foreclosed, you would get nothing. And so one interesting consequence of this was that you did not have, unlike much of the rest of the country, when in the 2000s, there was not really this huge boom in Texas in housing, in mortgage debt and housing prices, because you couldn't use it in the same way as collateral for, to finance your consumption, unlike a lot of other states. So I think that's that kind of thing, which is definitely not done deliberately on their part, but that's I think those kinds of reforms can also be useful.